The December air bit at our skin as I tightened Leora's coat and smoothed my hair one last time before pushing open the heavy glass doors of the banquet hall. She looked up at me, wide-eyed, clutching her little snowflake purse with a kind of innocence I'd been forced to shed long ago. I told myself to smile, breathe, walk tall. Inside, the hall sparkled, too perfect, almost like it was trying to distract from something rotten underneath. Golden lights dangled from the ceiling, wrapping the space in a faux warmth. Tables dressed in white linen and red ribbon were lined with hors d'oeuvres and eggnog stations. Christmas carols hummed through the speakers, but beneath it all I felt it, the cold. The first face I saw was Vera's. Her eyes scanned me top to bottom, then flicked away with a smirk. She wore something glittering, probably designer, her blonde hair in waves too calculated to be called casual. I caught other glances too. Aunt Carla, Rick's cousin from Houston, even Mrs. Goldstein, who barely knew me, raised an eyebrow like I'd shown up in overalls. I didn't say anything, just adjusted Leora's hand in mine and walked further in. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Maya Angelou's voice echoed in my head, and they had, time and time again. Vera, of course, was seated at the head table. She waved us over with the kind of smile that hides a dagger. "Elara," she drawled, "so glad you could finally make it. Looking decent too." Leora looked up at me, her brows knitting. I forced a smile, but my molars pressed together. A cousin nearby let out a laugh. It echoed longer than it should have. We were pointed toward a table near the restrooms. Someone had slapped a paper name tag on the linen. "Elena," Leora whispered. "Mum, they spelled your name wrong." I peeled the label off, folded it in half. "It's all right, sweetie." But it wasn't. This family, Rick's family, had always made it clear I didn't quite belong. Vera ran things since their father passed. She handled the books. She hosted every event. She approved the guest list. I was never more than tolerated. I sat with Leora and helped her settle in. My eyes roamed the room. Groups of relatives stood in circles, laughing, whispering. Every so often someone would glance over and lean in closer. I'd seen it before. This wasn't new. But tonight it felt sharper, more deliberate. I sipped cider, watching the fake snow in the windows and the perfectly placed wreaths on each wall. Every detail screamed curated joy. And yet, "Pick your battles," I muttered under my breath. But tonight felt different. Not just the same tired digs or side eyes. There was something heavier in the air, like the weight of all the years I'd kept my mouth shut had reached a limit. I remembered the first Christmas after Leora was born. Vera had called her a cute accident. Rick had laughed. I didn't. My daughter deserved better than this. So I sat straighter, smiled less. Then came the moment that made my jaw ache. Vera floated by again, this time with a group of women trailing her like perfume. She stopped beside our table, tilted her head, and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Well, Elara finally showed up looking almost put together. The table went quiet. A beat later, chuckles. I looked down. Leora was frowning. She reached for my hand. I've swallowed worse, I thought, but tonight tastes different. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. I waved him off. I wasn't drinking, not when I needed to stay sharp. A while later, an announcement rang out. Vera's voice, sugary sweet, filled the room. "Kids' play zone is open. Santa's helpers are waiting." Leora's eyes lit up. "Can I go?" I hesitated, then nodded. Just for a little while. She skipped off. I stood watching her go. A flash of movement caught my eye, Vera whispering to one of the staff, glancing briefly in Leora's direction. I blinked, shook my head. Maybe I was reading into things. But minutes later, I walked past the gift table. Names were neatly labelled. I scanned quickly. Leora's wasn't there. I had submitted her name. I remembered the email. I even had the confirmation. I didn't react. I just noted it. Like stacking stones in a riverbed, one slight at a time. Eleanor Roosevelt's words came to me. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Well, I hadn't consented to this. I returned to our table, trying to look casual. The chair felt harder, the room colder. Then came the laughter, not the kind from jokes or reunions, but a sharp, shrill kind from the back, the children's area. They're doing something wild with the kids. It's hilarious, someone at the bar said with a grin, not even looking my way. Something twisted in my gut. I stood slowly, walked toward the hallway. The music faded behind me. My heels tapped the tile like a metronome counting down something I didn't yet understand. I reached the door to the children's room. Paused. Leora was in there. My fingers hovered over the knob. I pushed the door open, not yet knowing the sight would change me forever. I pushed the door open, and time stopped. The room was quiet, unnaturally so. The overhead lights flickered, buzzing faintly like they were the only ones brave enough to speak. A dozen little heads turned toward me, wide-eyed and still, except for one, Leora. She was crouched in the far corner, facing the wall, arms wrapped around her knees, her back rising and falling in shallow breaths. The first thing I noticed was the scattered strands on the floor, soft golden tufts like feathers torn from a pillow. Then I saw her scalp, bare, patchy in places, shaved clean in others. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My feet were planted like roots, but every part of me screamed to run to her. And then I saw Eliza, Vera's daughter, standing center stage holding electric clippers like a trophy. Her smile was smug, her eyes taunting, like this was all some school prank. A laugh started building in her throat like she was proud of herself. I took one step inside and she didn't even flinch. She said it was okay, Eliza said casually. It was just a game. Everyone thought it was funny. Leora turned her face slightly toward me. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, but she hadn't sobbed. That broke me more. She was holding it in for me. Behind Eliza, the other kids avoided my eyes, shuffling, guilty, silent. A staff member leaned against the doorframe behind me. We're told not to interfere in family stuff, he muttered. They're all related, right? I didn't respond. I crossed the room and knelt down in front of Leora. She didn't lift her head. I wrapped her in my coat, whispering things I couldn't even hear myself say. Her small body trembled against my chest. I looked at the clippers on the floor, still warm, still humming. This wasn't a game, it was targeted, cruel. A message, maybe, but I didn't understand why, yet. I carried her out, slow and steady. Each step heavy with what I was holding, not just her, but everything that had ever been taken from us quietly. The music in the hall was still playing. Lights twinkled. Conversations paused as I stepped into view. Silence, all eyes turned. I didn't speak. Then Vera approached. She looked at Leora, really looked, and then laughed. She looked messy anyway. At least now she looks clean. The words didn't land like a joke. They thudded, sharp and cold. I stared at her necklace, her eyes, her smirk. No apology, no regret, just confidence. What is wrong with you? I said, my voice low but firm. It's just hair, she replied. Don't be dramatic. A few guests shifted awkwardly. Some glanced down at their drinks. No one stepped forward. No one said a word. I stood alone. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked Leora to the restroom and locked the door behind us. I sat her on the counter, ran warm water, gently rinsed her head, wiping the remaining strands away. Did I do something bad? She asked. Is that why she did this? I closed my eyes. They say words cut deep, I whispered, but razors do worse when wielded by the cruel. She didn't understand the words, but she felt the weight. I kissed her forehead. No one will ever touch you like that again. Ever. I meant it. I dressed her in a hoodie from my purse, pulled it over her head, covered her as best I could, and then we returned to the hall. No drama, no accusations, just presence. That kind of silence speaks louder than screams. I met Vera's eyes. She smiled again, victorious, but something in her flinched. Because I didn't break, I walked past her, holding Leora close. You touched my child. Now I'll dismantle everything you stand on. I smiled at Vera, just once. She mistook it for surrender. The car ride home was silent. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that pressed against your chest like a weight you couldn't shake off. Leora curled in my lap, her head tucked into my coat, breathing softly. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark road outside, counting each street lamp we passed. Rowan gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. But he didn't say a word, not a question, not a glance in the rearview mirror. I waited. Maybe he'd ask. Maybe he'd at least look at her, at the hoodie pulled over her head, hiding what his sister had done. He didn't. I stared at his profile. The strong jaw, the eyes set straight ahead, a man so trained to look past what hurt if it made things easier. Vera had taught him that, and he'd learned well. We pulled into the driveway. Still nothing. At home, I took Leora straight to the bathroom. Rowan stayed downstairs, probably poured himself a whiskey like he always did when he didn't want to deal with anything real. The bathroom light was soft. I filled the tub with warm water and sat her in gently, washing the remnants of the evening from her skin. Her scalp was pink in places. I dabbed it with aloe, careful not to press too hard. She didn't talk much, just held my wrist when I rinsed her head like she needed to be sure I was still there. After I tucked her into bed, I sat on the edge of the mattress, watching her sleep. Her chest rose and fell slowly. I brushed her cheek, then stood up, turned off the lamp, and left the door open just a crack. I walked back to the kitchen. The hum of the fridge filled the room. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. For a moment, I stared at the blank screen. Then I started typing. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was calm, clinical, a report, names, times, what was said, what was done. I added photos, the clippers, the tufts of hair I had swept off the floor into a bag. I labelled the bag with the date. I even noted the exact location at the party. Down to the minute. The email wasn't addressed to Rowan or Vera. It was for the administration at Briarwood Academy, where both our kids went. I saved the draft. Didn't send it, not yet. They always said I was too quiet, I muttered to no one. But I've learned that silence can be a blade too. That thought stayed with me. I stepped out onto the porch, pulled my cardigan tighter around me. The wind cut through like glass, but I welcomed it. I looked up at the night sky, black as ink, and the memories came back. It was summer, 3 years ago, a family barbecue at Vera's lake house. I had worn a white sundress, my favourite. Vera had walked behind me, scissors in hand, and sliced the back open, laughing that it was a prank. Everyone laughed, so I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Start a scene? Make people uncomfortable? I told myself it didn't matter, that I could take a joke. But it hadn't been a joke. It was a test, and I failed it. Every time I stayed quiet, she pushed a little further, and now it was my daughter paying the price for my silence. I sipped my tea, cold now. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from focus. Rowan hadn't said one word, not in the car, not at home, not even a passing question. He was asleep on the couch now, blanket tossed over his chest, mouth slightly open, like nothing had happened, like this was just another night. I stood in the hallway and watched him, the man who had promised to protect us, the man who said nothing while his sister humiliated our daughter. I didn't feel sadness anymore, or even anger, just clarity. I may have married into this family, I whispered, but I don't belong to them. In the morning I made 3 phone calls. Not one of them was to Rowan. The music had started again. Soft jazz hummed from the speakers like nothing had happened. People were drifting back into the main hall with their plates of pie and coffee cups in hand. Voices rising just above polite laughter. The twinkling lights along the ceiling tried their best to keep the room festive, but they couldn't reach me where I stood. I was near the dessert table, not eating, not really standing with anyone, just there, watching. Vera moved through the crowd like she owned oxygen, smiling, joking, clinking glasses, like the past hour hadn't happened. Around her was a cluster of well-dressed shadows, men and women who clung to her aura like it meant something. Some of them had looked away earlier when I walked in with Leora. Some had stared too long, and now they were back at her side, whispering things they wouldn't dare say out loud. I saw them glance at me, then look away. The waiter came by with a tray of champagne. "No, thank you," I said. My voice was steady, but inside something had changed. Not just tonight, not just because of Leora, but because I'd spent too long pretending not to notice. If they think I won't fight back, they're about to learn otherwise. Then came the clink of Vera's glass, a soft ding-ding-ding against crystal. She stood near the stage, raised her voice, and the room quieted like someone turned a dial. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, with that familiar brand of false humility that always made my teeth ache. "I've spoken with the family board, and we've decided to do something special, something meaningful. Starting this year, the family's education fund, originally founded by my father, will now carry a new name. It will be renamed the Elara Grace Fund." A murmur moved through the crowd. Hands came together in polite applause. I didn't move. "Isn't this fitting?" Vera added, turning to me with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "After tonight's spectacle, Elara has reminded us all how deeply we care about the next generation. So now she'll be linked to the legacy. Forever." The applause grew again, but it wasn't kindness, it wasn't respect. It was spectacle, a repackaged humiliation dressed in philanthropy. They wanted to tie my name to this, to make it look like I was grateful for the cruelty, like I was part of the pageantry. I didn't clap. I didn't blink. Somewhere someone whispered, "Is she being generous or manipulative?" And someone else replied, "Same thing with Vera." I took a deep breath, turned away from the stage, and that's when it happened. A woman I didn't recognize, probably one of the distant cousins from Oregon, waved at me politely. "Mom?" she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Would you like me to get you a plate?" A few people chuckled. I looked down at my blouse. Simple, dark, not flashy. I'd chosen it for comfort, not glamour. To her, I was one of the servers. Leora, sitting with Orion near the fire, caught the exchange. Her eyes narrowed. She knew. I forced a smile. "I've got my own plate, thanks." The woman blinked, flustered. "Oh, I didn't mean—" "It's fine." It wasn't, but I let her off the hook, because I wasn't ready to swing yet. I stepped away from the crowd, down the hallway past the coat check, and ducked into the alcove near the side window. The cold air from the window pane felt good against my skin. From here I could still see the crowd, but they couldn't see me. Vera was now leaning in, talking with 2 older men, pointing in my direction. I couldn't hear the words, but I read her lips. "That's her, the charity woman." The men nodded, amused. Another woman next to them, dressed in green silk, glanced toward me and looked away, uneasy. I watched it all quietly. Who smirked, who whispered, who looked at the floor, and I kept mental notes. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and touched the lavender handkerchief Leora had tied there days ago. Just a kid's thing, but now it was a line in the sand. I squared my shoulders. They'd expect me to speak now, or cry, or storm out. No, I'd choose my moment. Vera finished her little toast. To unity, progress, and honouring those who carry our legacy. The crowd lifted their glasses. I lifted mine too. The movement slow, deliberate, not in celebration, but in warning. A camera flash went off nearby. I turned my head slightly and caught the lens full on. My face wasn't smiling. It was something else entirely. They'll see my face tomorrow. They'll know something broke tonight. The morning sun filtered through the oaks as Leora and I walked up the stone steps to Vera's family country club. The air smelled of wet grass and fresh snow left over from last night's chill. She wore a beanie pulled low, hiding her scalp, the same head that had been violated hours ago. I gripped her hand, walking with cautious dignity. We entered a hall that looked benign. Linen tablecloths, silverware polished to blind, and soft chatter among guests in pale sweaters. It was brunch, but felt like a stage. All eyes flicked toward us. Whispered greetings followed. People moved on as though nothing had been broken, as though this was simply Sunday. Rowan sat beside Vera, sipping his coffee with a light laugh, as if the night before was just some bad dream. I recognized the distance in his posture, physically close, emotionally miles away. He caught my gaze briefly and looked away. Vera stood, smiled broadly, and extended her hand to me. In the room full of genteel faces, she said, "Elara, good to see you. Thank you for attending." Her tone was syrupy, polite, rehearsed, as if nothing had happened. I met her gaze, held it steady. "I'm glad to be here," I replied. "But I'll say this. Children's boundaries are sacred. Lasting emotional scars don't fade because someone says they're sorry." No tremor in my voice. Some guests stiffened. Vera's lips twitched. She laughed, but it was hollow. One of her friends leaned in, murmuring, "She's changed, hasn't she?" Another nodded. I felt the ripple of tension move outward. Rowan stood abruptly and pulled me aside, pressing his voice low. "Why must you always escalate things in front of everyone?" His words hit like a slap. "Escalate?" I asked, voice firm, "or finally stop pretending silence is safety?" My chest ached. I could see his jaw tighten. He said, "I can't pick sides." That cut deeper than any insult. Under my breath, I said, "Your silence has always been your loyalty." His eyes flicked away. I returned to the lunch table. Vera tried to reassert the moment. She raised her glass, praised me. "Your restraint tonight proves your strength." As if she were gifting me dignity, she leaned in, smiling, expecting relief. Instead, I lifted my glass steadily and said, "Restraint isn't weakness, it's choice." Gasps. Forks paused midair. Vera froze mid-toast. Guests looked confused. Leora, beside me, gripped my hand under the table, her small fingers saying what she could not. I wasn't absorbing blows anymore. I gathered my coat, squeezed Leora's shoulders, and turned toward Rowan, who lingered by the door. "You'll need to decide who you stand with," I said quietly. "Don't take too long." I walked out, Leora beside me, silent. The sun felt colder on my face than when I came in. 3 nights after that brunch, an envelope showed up. No return address, just weight and gloss, like it came from somewhere important. Inside was a formal invitation from the Family Foundation. "Semi-formal dinner," it said. Rowan didn't look up from his phone when I asked. He just muttered, Vera mentioned something. You should go. Show face. Keep peace. Leora had a cold. She stayed home. Part of me was relieved not to drag her through another room full of polite venom. I dressed carefully, nothing too loud, nothing too plain, a navy sheath dress, modest heels. I even curled my hair. The venue was grander than the paper hinted. Crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves, gowns that brushed the marble floor. As soon as I stepped in, I knew I'd been played. My dress, though clean and careful, suddenly felt like I'd walked into prom by mistake. Vera stood near the bar. Her mouth barely moved behind the rim of a champagne glass. "Didn't you get the real memo?" She said not to me, but to the woman beside her, loud enough to land. Their laughter was polite, low, and aimed like a rifle. They sat me at the far end of the table, not with Rowan, not with the cousins, tucked in like staff, and it wasn't just the seat, it was the silence. Conversations floated past me like smoke. A few guests leaned in with saccharine smiles. "You're Leora's mother, right? So what is it you do? How long have you and Rowan been married?" Every question came with a barb sewn in. Then the lights dimmed. A projector flickered on. At first, gala highlights, smiling donors, handshakes. Then it shifted. Photos of Leora, her bald head, her hesitant smile. Overlaid text. "Our youngest inspiration, hair donation for cancer warriors." The air left my lungs. My daughter made into a mascot. A symbol, a punchline. No one had asked, not Rowan, not Vera. No one had said, "Is this okay?" Under the tablecloth, my hands closed into fists. I stood, I tapped my glass once, then again. Louder the second time. The room went quiet. "I won't take much of your time," I said, my voice steady. "Just a small correction." Every eye turned. "My daughter is not a campaign. She is not your story. Her illness was not your opportunity." Vera raised a hand like she could wave me off. I didn't let her. "Don't wrap betrayal in silk and call it family tradition. Don't slap a logo on pain and call it philanthropy." Rowan wouldn't meet my eyes. Vera opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "Leora's hair was not your story to tell," I said, clear and final. Silence. Then a few scattered coughs. Someone reached for their water. The younger cousins looked anywhere but at me. One aunt, the one with the heavy pearls, gave the smallest nod. I picked up my clutch, stood tall, and walked out. I didn't wait for dessert. The parking lot was dark. I sat in the car, hands trembling, breathing like I'd just come up from underwater. Then tears came, hot and sudden, not from shame. God, no, but from everything that had been boiling inside me for too long finally breaking the surface. There's no going back to pretending. The gloves are off. At home, once the house went quiet, I pulled the attic ladder down. Dust stirred. I reached past the holiday boxes and the baby clothes to the back wall. A cardboard box with fading marker. Mum's letters. It had been years, but now I needed to remember who taught me what strength really looked like. The sun hadn't fully risen, but I was already pacing. My house looked like a war zone of untouched mugs, crumpled tissues, and a half-eaten dinner still on the counter from the night of the gala. My mind kept looping through that evening, Vera's smug smirk, Leora's face flashing across that slideshow, and the echo of silence from the people who should have stood up with me. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a saved voicemail. My mother's voice filled the kitchen, soft but steady, a message she'd left years ago. "Baby, I know you want to keep the peace, but don't ever let silence cost you your voice." I closed my eyes and let the words soak in. She always saw through things before I did. That morning I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I walked slowly from room to room, replaying the gala, not with shame or pain, but like a detective reconstructing a scene. The pattern was there. Vera had always operated with a kind of elegant venom. But I hadn't noticed how consistent it was. I should have spoken up sooner, not just for me, but for Leora, for the girl who looked to me to show her how to stand. I sat down at the dining table, opened a fresh journal, and began to write. Not thoughts, but facts. Dates, events, who was there, what was said, what wasn't. It wasn't a diary, it was a logbook, war prep. Later that day, after putting away laundry and folding Leora's blanket at the foot of her bed, I found myself scrolling through the family's shared cloud folder, mostly out of curiosity, partly out of masochism. There were pictures of past holidays, group messages, and then a file simply labeled V recording. My stomach turned, I tapped it open. Vera's voice burst through, laughing, talking to someone, maybe one of the cousins. Let's see if the mommy lioness still purrs when her cub gets a new look, she joked. There was laughter, then something about how Elara's always so serious. Maybe this'll loosen her up. I sat motionless. That voicemail was dated a week before Leora's haircut. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was planned, measured. I downloaded the file, then saved it again and again, USB drive, external drive, cloud backup. This wasn't gossip, this was evidence. This isn't just petty anymore, I said aloud, breath catching in my throat. This is targeted. 2 evenings later, I met Camille. We picked a small cafe off the main strip, one where the staff didn't know our names and the booths were too deep to overhear conversation. Camille had always been the quiet one at family events. Kind, observant, never loud, she stirred her tea without looking up, then said, "I saw what she did to you. I've seen it before." She shared how Vera had twisted stories in the past, sabotaged her scholarship years ago by floating rumors to an alumni committee. "I didn't say anything back then. I was scared. Still am," Camille confessed. Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed dry. She unlocked her phone and passed it to me. Screenshots, old messages from Vera, jokes at my expense, calculated jabs, proof of a long game. "You're not crazy," she said, finally meeting my gaze. "No," I replied, "but I've been too quiet." Camille smiled faintly. "One whisper isn't enough." "But 2," I said, "can start a storm." After Leora went to bed, I cleared the dining table again. This time, I spread out printouts, emails, sticky notes. I built a timeline of Vera's actions, linking events and behaviors. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was clarity and consequences. I dug into school policy documents, non-profit reporting laws, and privacy rights for minors. My laptop buzzed under the weight of open tabs. I opened an encrypted browser, created a burner email, and submitted an anonymous question to the Family Foundation Board. If funds are used for personal vendettas, how does the board typically respond? I didn't expect a reply. I just needed them to know someone was watching. I whispered to myself, "Silence can be golden, but if you know how to use it, it cuts sharper than rage." Close to midnight, Camille texted again. She keeps all her real stuff on her personal phone. Messages, proof she's been shifting funds between accounts. I stared at the screen, then looked back at my journal. I turned to a fresh page and wrote one sentence. "Every fortress has a crack." I circled it twice, underlined it once. This time I wasn't waiting for permission. I stared at my phone screen late into the night and typed one line into the family group chat. "The truth always finds the light. Some truths may include misuse of power." I attached a document, just a page labeled Board Ethics Overview, no names, no accusation. I hit send. Minutes passed, then Vera reacted with a string of emojis. Smiling face, raised eyebrow, then a red-faced oops. The tone in the comment was polite but tense. I didn't respond. Camille texted me privately. "She's spiraling. She's calling people already." I watched the chat go silent again, letting the stillness work for me. By morning, I saw Vera's email to the foundation board. Regarding allegations of fund misuse, let me assure you there is no impropriety. In doing so, she included detailed numbers I had never published, exact amounts, dates, even account codes. She exposed her own secret ledger, thinking she'd triumph. But one board member forwarded that email to me anonymously with 3 words. She just outed herself. I forwarded it to Camille. She replied, "Now we wait, quietly." That's when I understood. Setting the trap was about patience, not confrontation. Later that day, Rowan found Vera pacing their guest room. Phone pressed to her ear. I heard snatches. "Control the optics. Isolate Elara. Do not let her leak documents." His face turned grey. That night he asked me bluntly, "Have you been investigating her?" I handed him the voicemail from 2 chapters ago. He listened in silence. He didn't defend her. He didn't apologize, but he stopped standing in her shadow. A few days later, I received a nondescript invitation to meet with a board ethics consultant. Anonymous, off the record. I packed a binder full of screenshots, voicemails, forwarded emails, and Camille's inside messages. Camille wrote a signed statement. I walked into the foundation office not as a wife, not as a guest, but as a witness armed with facts. I told myself, truth isn't always loud, sometimes it's just undeniable. As I exited the boardroom, phone vibrating in my hand, I saw Vera's name appear. I answered, "You've made a mistake, a very public one." Her voice was cold, quiet, and for the first time I wasn't afraid. I woke that morning to stillness, not the hollow kind, but something steady. The papers from mediation lay on my desk, a faint reminder that yesterday had changed everything. Rowan had already started the legal steps separating him from Vera's influence. He filed formal papers that morning. The board issued its decision, Vera's access suspended, full audit underway. I sipped my coffee quietly. Camille's text blinked. "It's over, you did this right." I didn't need cheers, I needed peace, and now I felt closer. At mediation that afternoon, Vera's seat stayed empty. No call, no note, just silence echoing in the room. Rowan sat beside me, face set, hands folded. We signed the documents, nothing dramatic but final. I stayed composed, calm. Every word, every gesture was for Elara, so she'd never feel caught in the crossfire again. Later at home, Rowan found me folding a throw blanket in the living room. "I believed her for too long," he said quietly, shoulders heavy. "You deserved better." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for patience, to rebuild through actions, not words. I nodded, not reconciliation yet, but possibility. "Some people don't need to fall to change," I said. "They just need the truth spoken loud enough." He moved to the guest room without argument. A quiet shift. Months passed as I quietly rebuilt. I launched a reading program at the local community centre. Children's laughter echoed in the halls. Former foundation staff showed up, brighter, freer. One volunteer said, "When people see courage, they want to follow it." I didn't post about it. I just showed up, delivered books, listened. On the wall hung a quote Camille and I had picked out. "You don't raise your voice, you improve your argument." Then came the moment that closed something in me. At her school showcase, Elara climbed the stage and lifted a drawing. A woman holding a girl's hand, and at the top, the words "Truth wins." Teachers later told me, she said her mum taught her how not to be afraid. My chest tightened, but I did not cry. The fight had never been just for justice. It was for legacy, for a daughter who would know she had a mother who stood up. That evening I sat at the desk, closed the laptop. An email request waited. A non-profit in town offered me leadership. I looked at Elara asleep on the sofa, a bookmark still open in her hand. The house was quiet but alive. I whispered, maybe it's time to stop surviving and start leading.